I love Jujutsu Kaisen. It's my favorite new gen series and it really excels in every aspect it puts forward, is what I would have said a year or two ago. Unfortunately, since then, the quality of Jujutsu Kaisen feels like it has waned, getting notably worse since the Culling Games, which was already seen as a downgrade from the Shibuya incident. But what happened? How did a series go from this to this? A lot of people will look at the current manga and assume the drop in quality started with Gojo's death, and they would be right for the most part. But the cracks started to form quite a while ago, specifically in chapter 208 with the death of Yuki Tsukumo. This was the first moment that a significant amount of fans felt upset by the choices Gege was making. Ever since her introduction in the Hidden Inventories arc, Yuki felt like a character that would be important to the endgame of Jujutsu Kaisen. Often when shonen anime have an enemy class like cursed spirits, the end goal of the series is to get rid of that enemy. This can be seen clearly with Attack on Titan, Demon Slayer, and Hunter x Hunter to an extent. Freeing society from this kind of enemy is a major part in the end game of these series, and it felt like Yuki was supposed to be important in this process with her interest in moving humanity away from cursed energy entirely. This was further corroborated by her being a character foil to both Geto and Kenjaku, with Yuki opposing them both ideologically and physically. Her sudden and unceremonious removal from this series fell off to a lot of people, as it seemed like she was introduced and then written out of the story for no good reason. It also doesn't help that her death was kind of poorly done, and I think it resulted in the first straw on the camel's back that created strain between the readers and Gege Akutami. The next major issue fans had with the series was the treatment of Sumiki. Saving Sumiki in general was a major motivation for Megumi from the moment he was introduced. We see it manifest in him during the Bridge Cursed Spirit case, and again later on when she's the main reason that all of the students joined the Culling Games. For over 200 chapters, she is built up to be a character that is significant to Megumi and someone that needs saving. So her being overwritten by Yozuru didn't exactly sit well with fans of Megumi. This was only made worse by the fact that Yozuru was widely considered a poorly written character thanks to her overreactiveness and incestuous tendencies. And it's then made even worse by the way she's killed off, turning her into nothing more than a plot device to strengthen Sukuna after Sumiki had been built up for so long. Sumiki's treatment could be considered the second strike that some fans had against the series, and its close proximity to Yuki's death made some question the quality of the series moving forward. Another issue at the time of release was chapter 220, as this time skip chapter just felt weird, introducing a bunch of plot threads and poorly covering the time skip itself. This was also around the time when Gojo just chose not to fight 15-finger Sukuna, which he probably would have won, but honestly, all of these moments pale in comparison to the moment that broke Jujutsu Kaisen and turned fans in mass on the series. Chapter 236. This chapter was a mess. Every issue we covered so far is smaller than any of the individual issues in chapter 236. And because this chapter is so riddled with issues, we are going to be covering just the main three. Starting with the elephant in the room, Gojo's death. Killing off your most popular character is always a risky move. In fact, I can't think of another anime as popular as Jujutsu Kaisen that has killed off their most popular character. It would be like killing Levi Ackerman or Killua. It just doesn't happen. And there's a reason for that. See, killing off this genre of ultra popular character is a delicate matter, and it's almost impossible to do without highly precise planning, foreshadowing, and setup. So for Jujutsu Kaisen to kill Gojo as poorly as it did, it just adds insult to injury. Off-screening characters is frowned upon in general, but doing it to one of the most popular anime characters of all time is just a bad idea. It's made even worse by the fact that the previous chapter literally ends with Gojo wins and Sukuna looking like he just emerged from a glory hole gauntlet. Cutting to Gojo in the airport was an extremely jarring change of pace that truly fell out of left field. And unfortunately, the conversation that follows doesn't really help the circumstances appear any better, as Gojo basically just glazes Sukuna for 3 pages before some vague statements about whether or not he will come back. I can understand Gojo wanting to acknowledge Sukuna's strength and praising him for allowing Gojo to go all out, but saying he probably wouldn't have beaten Sukuna without the 10 Shadows technique just feels a bit out of character. Gojo has always been cocky and confident, and while it's obvious that this battle is different than any of his others, him praising his opponents in any way is a completely foreign concept to him as a character. This feels even more out of character because he chose to praise Sukuna instead of spending time talking about his students who were his main motivation from the very beginning. Not even mentioning them in his final moments feels like an incredible oversight, and unfortunately, it's not the only major issue with this chapter, as Gojo's actual death by the slash that cuts the world was also extremely poorly done. Not only was it an ability that was not explained at the time, which I personally am not a fan of, but the fights since then have shown that pretty much every other character except Gojo is somehow able to dodge the slash that cuts the world, which just doesn't really feel right. There's no reason that someone like Kusakabe is able to dodge the slash that cuts the world and Gojo isn't. No offense to Kusakabe. The most recent chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen somehow introduces another issue with this slash, which is the binding vow used to pull it off. This binding vow essentially feels like an afterthought band-aid solution to the backlash resulting from Gojo's bisecting, and it feels that way because it opens up so many holes in cursed energy as a system. First of all, the binding vow just doesn't make a lot of sense, at least to me. The way it's explained, it seems like Sukuna's binding vow allowed him to use strong dismantle one time with no condition in exchange for having to use chance enhance signs as a condition afterwards. But this implies that there was already a condition for using the slash, and as far as we know, chance enhance signs would be the condition for using a technique like this. So what was the condition that he bypassed with a binding vow? But that's not the main issue with the binding vow. The issue is that it calls into question literally every fight in Jujutsu Kaisen. If a binding vow can be made that allows the user to instantly fire off an attack in exchange for using hand signs and chance in the future, then why didn't Gojo do that when Mahoraga was first summoned to kill it before it destroyed his domain? Why didn't Mahito make that binding vow to better target Todo during their fight? Why didn't Jogo use it to summon Maximum Meteor more effectively? Why didn't Yuki use it to bypass her injuries and kill Kenjaku here? See what I'm saying? So many fights could have gone differently with just this one binding vow. It literally redefines power scaling in Jujutsu Kaisen and calls the entire series into question. There's also the issue that Sukuna's binding vow is much more one-sided than any of the protagonists. Like, Miwa gave up her ability to swing her sword to gain a similar effect to Sukuna, and it literally did nothing to Kenjaku. Obviously, Miwa is much weaker and less experienced than Sukuna, but it just feels so unfair that he's gotten so many more advantages than the protagonists get just for the sake of the plot. Regardless of this binding vow, Gojo's death was truly the straw that broke the camel's back. Except it wasn't a straw, it was a ton of concrete. With his death and its poor handling, fans instantly became more critical of the work surrounding it. This phenomena of fans switching up on a piece of media after a large plot point is done poorly is pretty common. It's akin to the rose-tinted glasses coming off, which leads to a lot more criticism of the media as it comes out, and it can even act retroactively as fans pick apart some of the previous moments whose mediocrity might have been overlooked at the original time of release. In some cases, the series can stand up to this onslaught of hatred and criticism, but unfortunately, Jujutsu Kaisen is not really one of those series. This increased criticism is made worse by the fact that the following arc, the fight against Sukuna, is probably the low point of the series so far. The main issue with this arc is it feels incredibly predictable. For 12 of the past 18 chapters, the same exact thing has happened in 3 chapter cycles. First, a new sorcerer is introduced and they spend the chapter fighting Sukuna. Then, the next chapter they do something cool or impressive within the world of Jujutsu. And then the third chapter, Sukuna somehow overpowers the sorcerer and brings them close to death. This exact cycle has happened 4 times so far, with Kashimo, Higuruma, Yuta, and Maki. Here's the thing though, cycles are not bad in general. A lot of series revolve on a cyclical format for their progression. One Piece, for example, has a general cycle of Luffy showing up to an oppressed island, freeing that island, having a celebration, and then leaving and heading to a new island. Formulas in fiction can work, like this case. The issue with Jujutsu Kaisen is that it's too obvious and feels too repetitive. One Piece cycles happen over dozens or hundreds of chapters, not over 3. And there's also a lot of variation within each cycle. That's not the case for Jujutsu Kaisen, and herein lies the issue. It just feels like lazy writing. The same exact thing happening over and over again never feels good, especially in a story like Jujutsu Kaisen where it doesn't have to be that way. But I should give credit where credit is due. It wasn't all bad. There were some really cool moments in these 12 chapters, and one chapter really stood out as being a masterpiece of what made Jujutsu Kaisen so beloved. Chapter 250. 250 is Jujutsu Kaisen at its peak. It is by far the best chapter that we've gotten since the Gojo and Sukuna fight, and honestly, I think it's the best chapter we've gotten since Shibuya. Controversial, I know, but think about it. Everything that makes Jujutsu Kaisen great is in this chapter. It's a 2v1 won. The protagonists feel coordinated, and it seems like they might actually have a chance to win. And it's the two main characters fighting against the main antagonist. Who doesn't love that? There's intentional contrast between the main characters, a bit of teasing of a reveal, and even some humor. It is a stellar chapter, and it stands as a high point in a sea of mediocrity. Now that we've established our evidence for Jujutsu Kaisen's decline in quality, let's talk about why. There are three main potential reasons that Jujutsu Kaisen's writing has gotten notably worse. The first and most likely reason is that Gege is just not enjoying producing this series anymore, and as a result they're just going through the motions and not putting nearly as much passion into the series as they once were. While we obviously cannot see what's going on inside the head of the author, I feel like this is a fairly likely reason. Just looking at the quality of something like the narration currently compared to during the Shibuya incident reveals that some of the poetry and metaphors baked into the story has disappeared. If you want more direct evidence of the passion dying, the choreography is getting repetitive, meaning Gege isn't creating new iconic poses in the way that he used to. He's also talked a few times about how he's not a huge fan of the weekly cycle, and when you do something that you don't like for 4 years, it can lead to some serious burnout that can heavily affect the enjoyment of a production. The second potential reason behind the drop in quality is that Gege just wants to finish the series quickly and doesn't really care about what that entails for the series. Maybe they're bored of this project, maybe they want to work on something else but can't until this is complete, who knows. We all know that the already fast pacing has gotten even faster since entering the 200s, so it does kind of feel like Gege is rushing to the end. This rushing is obviously in turn negatively affecting the series, as it is leading to less development of the plot overall and is creating holes in the power system that cause issues, as we've already covered. The third and final potential reason is that Gege's staff has changed behind the scenes, and as a result the input he gets from others has changed as well. Editors and artistic assistants can have a lot more influence over a work like this than you may think. They are the people the primary writer is most likely to go to for advice due to their extremely intimate knowledge of the series. There are a surprising number of iconic moments in popular manga that were suggested or asked for by editors and assistants. Some that immediately come to mind are Sasha not dying in season 2 of Attack on Titan, and the Greed Island arc of Hunter x Hunter getting restructured to be more forward focused. These changes are pretty significant to the stories that they're in, so if Gege had an editor or an assistant that was giving him input earlier in the manga, that could be the reason the quality was higher at the time. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that some random editor was behind all of the success of Jujutsu Kaisen and that Gege is actually just a mid-writer or whatever, but the changing quality between the first 140 chapters and the last 100 is pretty stark, and I can't help but think that part of this could be because of some changes behind the scenes. In reality, the most likely reason for the drop-off in quality is some combination of these three reasons. It's rare that one exact reason can be pinpointed as the reason that a series declines in quality, but if an author is losing interest in their work, wants to move on to other projects, and loses some important input on that work, together they can all make the work fall in terms of quality. If we want to give Gege and the team the benefit of the doubt, it is incredibly hard to keep up the quality of a work for hundreds of chapters over the course of years. Like, going that long without making a mistake or creating one bad plotline is really hard, and it's the main reason that a lot of manga or anime have a blockbuster first season and then kind of fall off afterwards. Regardless of the reason, I think it's clear that Jujutsu Kaisen has gotten worse overall in terms of quality, and I don't think I need to spend any more time proving that. So let's move on to the next obvious question. Is the series salvageable? Does it still have the potential to return to the quality that it was at in the first 2 seasons? Well, to be honest, I don't know if it can ever get back to that quality. The writing and story in general have changed so much that it's hard to say the original idea behind the story even exists anymore, but it definitely can still get better. There are a lot of ways Jujutsu Kaisen can return to the quality of at least the Culling games, if not surpass it. I think one easy solution is just for Gege to take like a month hiatus and put more time into planning what happens next instead of just pushing the series forward. No matter the creative pursuit, putting more time into the planning stages will almost always yield a better product. It's part of the reason so many monthly manga maintain their quality better than those on the weekly cycle. A break could help Gege and the team figure out the direction they want to go more concretely, and work through some potential storylines more thoroughly so the series doesn't feel like it's flying by the seat of its pants so much. It's also possible that bringing Gojo back could help improve the quality of the series, or at least how much fans are enjoying it. It was his death that set fans against the series in the first place, so as long as his return is done well in a way that makes sense, I think a lot of readers would go back to mildly enjoying the series again. It's also possible the issues we are experiencing experiencing get fixed during an anime adaptation by expanding the sequence surrounding Gojo's death, and Mappa's habit of embellishing fight sequences could make the cycle we're experiencing feel less monotonous. I guess what I'm trying to say is that Jujutsu Kaisen is not a lost cause. It could be improved without a huge amount of effort, and we could look back on this current arc as just a blip of poor quality in an otherwise good manga, rather than interpreting it as a downward dive like we do now. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to subscribe and join the Discord. It would really mean a lot to me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon for our next video.